happy to welcome Dr. Virginia Collier, who is Professor Emerita of Bilingual Multicultural ESL Education at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Hello. So thank you for being with us. And she has done a lot of research with Dr. Wayne Thomas together, right? Who is also Professor Emeritus of Evaluation and Research Methodology in the Graduate School of Education at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. And they're going to talk about dual language education, which will come, I think, very useful for us as well. We also have some dual, or we could say bilingual schools here as well. But I think we have lots to do in the future in this topic as well. So thank you, and the screen is yours.
Okay. So we will start with our PowerPoint. You want to?
Well, we could mention that you are a teacher and later an education professor. And I started off as a high school math and physics teacher, became an administrator in the school district, and later a professor emeritus. So we consider ourselves educators first, and researchers, methodology specialists here, content area, especially in bilingual education there. We consider ourselves educators first and professors second. We have a regular opportunity to work with the many school districts that we visit and work with continuously here in our country. So we have worked together since 1985. Believe it or not, some of you may not remember 1985, but we've been working together a long time. And so we have been collecting and analyzing data. We've currently analyzed over 8 million student records from 18 US states all around the country. And so it's been said that we have analyzed more data about students who are learning English than anyone, and in more different places. So far, no one has said, no, that's not true, but we'll wait for that. All right. We have a website, which we will put up for you later. We'll give you all the details, thomasandcollier.com. And there's a lot of wealth of information there for you if you're not already familiar with that. I have a couple of suggestions for you. We have a couple of suggestions before we get started with the formal presentation. And one is that we want to focus on broad and general themes in our presentation. And we'll try to de-emphasize the contextual details that are unique to the United States of America, the USA. We want you to be able to see the broad concepts that we feel, at least, may well be applicable to your context, your education context in your country. And we hope you'll look for opportunities to apply them as you see fit. And as Americans are prone to say, we want you to think outside the box here in terms of how well you could use these concepts in your unique local context. Okay, well, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Well, in that case, we'll have to bring up the slides then, won't we?
And let us know if they're not advancing properly.
We will.
One.
Yes, we can now see the second slide and the third. Yeah, they're advancing.
There we go. Okay. So this is your, do you want to say anything about Languages Matter? It's okay.
No, I mean, you know, the project is already known to our participants and the audience, so please just continue.
We salute you all. We think you're doing a fantastic and important
Yes.
project here.
It sounds at least vaguely similar to something we did with the U.S. Department of Education earlier in our careers, where they sent us around the USA for 6 years working with school districts, and many of our research relationships with school districts started during that period. So it can be a very rewarding experience, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
This is our topic. And next one. This is what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to look at all the programs that are developed in the USA that are involving 2 languages, and they can be English and whatever other language. And we're going to be looking at some of the results of our research. We do longitudinal research, which means following the same students all the way through their school years. Dual language works so well for all student groups. We have found that repeatedly, and the more data we've analyzed, the more we've said, my goodness, it even helps, for example, students with special needs, students who are have some particular issues regarding education. Okay, so this is the kind of the history of what has happened in the USA. And we consider it amazing that we have gotten as far as we have in the US, because during the 20th century, essentially, there was a lot of emphasis on only English. And that was the big theme all through the first half of the 20th century. And in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, there began to be forms of bilingual schooling for students who are not proficient in English, and we're calling them English learners. That's the main term that's used by our government. English learners don't yet know English, and they're developing English with each year of school. And we'll explain what one way means in a minute. It's the demographics of the program. One way is one language group being schooled through two languages. So,
for example, English learners being schooled in English and Spanish, or native English speakers being schooled in English and Spanish, for example.
And so that was developed in the United States in the first, the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, different forms of bilingual schooling only for the group that is called English learners. And at the same time in Canada, one-way immersion developed for native English speakers around the 1960s. These programs were called immersion, and they were for native English speakers to acquire the curriculum through English and French. And so both of these things were happening in the two countries, and they began to merge together. The two influenced each other a great deal. And we went through another 4 decades before we finally got to the place where dual language was taking the place of the two models above. Those two still exist, but the main one now is two-way dual language for everybody. And so two-way is where there are two language groups, for example, Spanish speakers and English speakers, acquiring the school curriculum through their two languages. And that's going to be the theme of our whole presentation.
So there are at least two concepts here that we want to point out to you before we go on, that in the past we have found that our European colleagues perhaps are not quite so familiar with. The first is the notion here of educating native speakers of the language and learners of that language together. That's essentially an innovation that started in Canada and has been developed here in the US. It's a North American innovation, and we have not in the past seen very much of it in our European visits. Secondly, Ginger mentioned we are primarily we're interested in language proficiency, as many European countries are, but we're also interested very much so in to what degree have students mastered the curriculum in both English and the other language, in your case, Slovenian and the other language. So there's a slightly different two concepts here that you may perhaps be unfamiliar with or not as familiar with. So we want to point these out as we move through the presentation. That's why we bring them up initially here in this slide.
And I'm going to mention one more thing about this one. The first two one-way programs were segregated programs. English learners learning by themselves in their own program. In Canada, native English speakers acquiring the curriculum through the two languages, but without French speakers mixed in with them. And so now we're talking about integrated schooling. That is where all the groups together are acquiring the curriculum through two languages. Okay.
So we're going to have to speed up the pace a bit here, aren't we?
Okay.
All right, here
we have 80 slides to go through, so go. 1 hour is not a lot of time to do that. Okay, this is what we're talking about when we say dual language enrichment education. And this is very different from what took place in the United States during the 20th century. This is our new program that's spreading very rapidly across the United States now.
There are presently more than 3,000 dual language programs in the US, and there are 16,000 school districts. So as you can tell, it's still developing, but the rate of growth is enormous right now. And we fully anticipate in the next 5 to 10 years, this will become, we hope, the major, most commonly found form of education for students in our country.
So the first step is that a school district will say, okay, we have maybe 20% of our students are speakers of Spanish. We're going to develop a dual language Spanish-English program. So they start out with what is the language of the non-English speakers, and then they're going to develop the program in that language and English. And then all students are going to work together. So they're going to be native English speakers who enroll in those classes. It's not a separate special program only for English learners. It's everybody working together, using the curriculum as the vehicle for acquiring the two languages. And again, it's not language lessons. It's math, science, social studies, and language arts taught through those two languages. Okay. Cognitive development and student engagement. These are two things that we're finding in all of our research. It tremendously helps those two things. Students interact with each other in classrooms. So there's a lot of student projects where they're working together. They're teaching each other through both oral language development and written language development. As they develop knowledge in one language, it transfers to the other language without having to reteach that information. And literacy skills transfer in languages too. So teachers say, okay, if we're going to teach reading in Spanish first, by the time we get to teaching literacy in English, maybe the next year, the kids have already picked it up. There are more than half of the skills transfer from one language to the other. Okay, and teachers have to use pretty up-to-date teaching strategies, and we'll talk about that later on, what that means. What happens? There's high student achievement. All groups benefit. We find that by the time that the students are maybe 15, no, younger than that, maybe 12 years old, 12, 13 years old, they're at least one grade ahead of their peers who are not doing schooling through two languages, and then 2 grades ahead in 2 more years. So it just dramatically improves their achievement in school. And this is true for low-income children as well as for middle-class children.
In fact, it's true of every group we've ever looked at, that the students in dual language not only outscore those not in dual language, they greatly outscore them. In statistics, we have a concept called effect size, which is a statistical measure of how powerful a program is. The effect sizes for dual language instruction, when it's well done, are larger than anything I have ever seen in 40 years plus of being a professional program evaluator. This is a very powerful program when it's done well. The most powerful program I've ever seen. Okay, so this is well worth your consideration if you can make it work in your context, and I believe you can.
And we find that not only is it create high achievement, the students develop superior English, the dominant language in the USA. They also develop very deep proficiency in the partner language because the human brain is wired for multilingualism. Plurilingualism.
As you folks know in Europe very well.
We have the ability to acquire multiple languages, and we're not using enough of our brain when we don't do that. So, and these students are very confident as they get into the high school years. Okay, next slide. So overall, the research shows full gap closure for students, high academic achievement, cognitive development, student engagement. That means they like school, they want to come to school.
It's not boring for them anymore.
And they graduate proficient bilinguals, able to use both of their languages in the workplace.
Now, we should say American schools are famous for producing people like me. I've studied other languages, but I'm not proficient in other languages. I am reasonably proficient in my first language, but the other three that I've studied, I really could not do my job in those languages. This program goes beyond that and produces proficient bilingual people who can do their jobs later as adults in any one of the languages in which they have been schooled. Any two of them, actually, if not more. All right.
And this program also changes the school system. So it actually creates a natural reform process. And we'll show you in the next slide just one example of that. Go ahead to the next one. That all the supervisors have to work together. This is a mainstream curriculum. It's the regular standard curriculum taught through two languages. And so the funding comes from the central office, and textbooks must be chosen that have appropriate contextual information in the partner language. And all the departments have to work together. They need library resources, technology resources in the partner language. And the teacher training that takes place should be provided by all departments as well. So everybody's going to work together in this one. It's really a major change.
And it does represent, as Ginger says, a huge change in the way that typical US school districts work.
Yeah.
Most, I spent years in the central office and in the district-wide administration, and everyone has their own area of focus and concentration. And typically there's not a lot of collaboration. That needs to change as dual language programs become much more common. And it is changing, but it is itself a vehicle for school system reform, something we wanted to point out to you as a major theme. Right?
So summary of the research on how the students do, and when they're in a dual language program, they score higher, they're more engaged, they have stronger self-esteem, they are more mature, more motivated, they have much higher high school graduation rates. We had before English learners were graduating at roughly half.
About 50%.
About 50%. Now the kids in the dual language classes are graduating, that 95% of the students are graduating. So it's quite different.
The various state legislatures that we have trained on this point have all taken great interest in this, very great interest, because here's one program that almost doubles the high school graduation rate of students who are English learners. That's a very important outcome to look at for policymakers and for administrators in particular.
These programs are so popular that each state has developed a biliteracy seal for the graduates. They have to take a major test in both English and in the partner language. And if they demonstrate that they are bilingually proficient through that test, then they get the biliteracy seal on their diploma. And that helps them with more money for scholarships and maybe getting into a more prestigious university, and it really is a big benefit. Okay, who is going to be in the dual language classes?
Well, we would have it that everyone should be in dual language classes, but we aren't there yet. So
so we're going to focus on three groups. This is how we do our research, is looking at least separating out how each of these groups do. So the first group is English learners. That could be, for example, immigrants to Slovenia, or refugees, any group who is not yet proficient in the Slovenian language. So we'll look at English learners and see how they do in the USA, and then we'll look at the other groups in a minute here. Okay. English learners, when they're tested on the standard English proficiency test, there are a number of them, but I'm just gonna, this particular one is called the WIDA test. That's not important. On the left side of this figure, you see the students who got English as a second language taught through academic content. And by the 8th grade, they get to the intermediate level on this very difficult English proficiency test. On the right side, you have students who were attending the dual language classes who get less time in English And by 5th grade, which is a lot sooner, three years sooner, they are at the advanced level in English. So dual language kids get a lot higher in English proficiency. It's like the stimulus of getting schooling through their native language helps them with figuring out English and getting to a more advanced level.
As I said earlier, the effect sizes here are very large. Dual language, when it's done well, has an extremely large effect, positive effect on students' proficiency in both languages and on their mastery of the curriculum in both languages.
Okay.
So here's one of those themes we talked about earlier.
Yeah, what's going on here? The important thing is for us to help all students be additive bilinguals. This is a concept that came from a sociolinguist back in the 1950s. The idea is that additive bilinguals, if they don't lose their first language and they develop another language or multiple languages, they will outscore monolinguals on any test. They're very positive cognitive benefits to being an additive bilingual. Subtractive bilinguals are those who are losing their first language as they're developing the second language. They do less well in school. In the United States, most of our students were subtractive bilinguals. They were losing their first language as they gained English. And the results was they did very poorly in school and then didn't get very high-paying jobs as adults. And we're trying to change that now through dual language, where everyone becomes an additive bilingual. Okay. At home, cognitive development is also happening, and what we are training school districts to do is to help the family understand that they can do best if they continue to use the language or languages that they know really well. So when the adults don't switch to the dominant language, if they are not proficient in that language, the kids do better in school.
Here's the thing, if an adult is proficient in a language, then they present themselves as a cognitively mature model for their children, for their students. This is true even for someone like me. If I were to try to work with one of my grandsons in my second language, I would sound like an elementary school student at best.
A first grader.
First grader, she says. But if I speak to him in my first language, I come across as what I am, a cognitively mature adult, an emeritus professor with 40 to 50 years of experience. I present myself as a completely different person in my first language than I do in a language which I really am not proficient in. And so that's true of these parents at home. If they are more proficient in their home language, they should be interacting with their students, their children, in the language in which they are most cognitively mature, because that's what causes greater levels of cognitive development at home for their children.
And if they're raising their family bilingually or even trilingually or whatever, however many languages, then those are the languages of the home. And bilingual from birth is great. That's your first languages. Notice all these activities that we put down here where cognitive development takes place. The parents do not have to be formally schooled. They are cognitively mature in their family language. And so when they do things like cooking together and talking about things that they're doing together, that's cognitive development. So they're helping their children with thinking skills in that process. And it's important for the parents to do that in the language that they're proficient in or they're the strongest in.
So as a former administrator and present evaluator, I would say the best way to harness this to the advantage of students is to have the school districts work with the parents in ways that allow the parents to interact with their children in their strongest language and thus help the schools attain the instructional objectives that the school has. A parent teacher collaboration, a formal one, not just, oh, let's work together, but a formal effort initiated by the schools to work with parents, to have parents work on cognitive development of their children at home is a very powerful way to proceed. There are many years of research that show that the influence of the home can be as great or even greater than the influence of the school time.
And they don't need to switch to the dominant language of the country. They simply need to use their home language. That's the key.
The language in which they are most cognitively mature, the parents themselves. Okay.
Next. Now we're going to focus on the yellow section, language minorities, who are not classified as missing in English. That they're fully bilingual. When they attend school, they're classified as, okay, this student doesn't need to receive a bilingual program. We say they do need to receive a bilingual program. And there are lots of these students in the USA, mostly Spanish speakers, who have not had a chance to develop their heritage language.
In our country, frequently school districts in the past have taken this second group and merged them with the third group and treated them as if they're the same. They are not. All you have to do to assure yourself of that is to analyze the test scores of this group separately from the other groups. It's called disaggregation. If you disaggregate the test scores and look at them separately in these three groups, you will discover what we have always discovered, that the second group that we're discussing now has its own achievement gap. And they're the ones who are not doing well in school. They're the ones who drop out of school. They're the ones who have problems to a much higher degree than they would otherwise have. So dual language instruction has the great benefit of working and helping with these students as well as the first group.
Okay, let's go to the next couple of slides. We're focusing on that group now. Whoops, go back, sorry. So in the USA, the large number of these students are Latino. They have originally come from Central, South America, Mexico, and they are coming in as newcomers, new arrivals at all grade levels, and they belong in the dual language program. And also the heritage students who are US residents. They grew up in the United States. They may be bilingual from birth. They may have lost their heritage language and they're only proficient in English. They belong in the dual language program too. So when you have a Spanish English program and you have all these kids who have that background, they should all be in the dual language classes.
Now you can take these concepts and generalize them to the Slovenian context and the Slovenian case. Okay, substitute your languages and your situations.
And this is just a look at all the languages of the world that's in Ethnologue. You can look it up online. And okay, next one. Now, so the advantages of dual language inclusion, where you're mixing, you're integrating all the students together. In this context, you don't have immigrants, refugees in some separate program. They're not socially isolated from their classroom peers, but they're getting development of their home language. Teachers have to use a lot of extra clues to meaning to get across the curriculum when they're working in second language. They do that through cooperative learning. And that's where the kids are collaboratively working together in problem solving.
This last point is another one of our themes, in that frequently, at least in our country, instruction for English learners is presented at a lower level of cognitive demand and at emphasizing short-term objectives, instructional objectives, not long-term. We want to point out that dual language classes do look at low-level objectives, but they also look at mid-range and high-level cognitive objectives. And they, in addition to the level of cognitive demand, they also look at long-term as opposed to short-term achievement. So effective dual language instruction is more comprehensive than the typical remedial program for English learners in our country. And this is one of the major changes and advantages of dual language instruction.
Okay, also, both groups are equally challenged when they're working in their second language, and so they can identify with each other instructionally and emotionally. And this really has changed the picture, because before the English learners were basically being picked on by their English speaking peers. I mean, sometimes there was nice things going on, and sometimes, but a lot of times there was not good friendship and everything. Dual language changes that picture because both groups are having to acquire a second language and work together. If it's Spanish-English program, when this lesson is in Spanish, the Spanish speakers are the experts, and when the lesson is in English, the English speakers are the experts. So they're working together a lot more of the time. Friendships develop across language and social class barriers, and that's another thing. This kind of helps a lot with bringing kids from poverty together with kids who are upper or middle class and helping them learn how to get along with each other.
This is especially advantageous in any country that has a highly diverse population.
Okay.
Such as yours.
So summary from remediation to enrichment. We're moving away from the programs that did more English. That was the screaming and shouting of the English only movement during the 20th century. And now we're moving to enrichment programs, which are developing other languages along with English. And there's more cognitive development, more students' interests in schooling, and more cross-cultural and environmental knowledge developed.
It's been very interesting when we present results such as ours to English-only folks, of whom there are still a few, because I enjoy pointing out that if you're only interested in English proficiency, the way to superior English proficiency is through dual language education, where you only get 50% of your instruction in English. That sounds counterintuitive, but it's very much the way that things work. And what's going on here is that the dual language students are getting much greater cognitive development. They're getting much more engagement with the effective classroom instruction that's occurring. And not only do they advance in curricular mastery, they also go beyond normal standards in mastery of English and a second language. And so in recent years, in the last 10 years in particular, the English only movement has more or less reacted by, oh, I think it's a little embarrassing for them to discover that the most powerful way to get to better proficiency in English, which is their only objective, is to do so through dual language instruction. It's taken them a while to absorb that lesson.
Okay, next one. And this is talking about different variations in dual language programs. We have many different types. Wayne calls them different flavors of dual language. You notice I forgot to say this at the beginning. We're using the term dual language instead of bilingual. We could be saying bilingual education.
It's enriched bilingual instruction.
Yeah,
it's not remedial bilingual instruction.
Right.
Right.
But the reason that we're using the term dual language is the politics that occurred in the USA during the late 20th century. The English only movement got very strong and attacked the transitional bilingual ed programs that were in place and did away with those in some states. And so dual language developed where it's exactly the same thing as bilingual education or bilingual schooling. It means the same thing.
Except it's an enriched form.
Yeah, and so we just, the political thing that happened was people started using the term dual language instead of bilingual, and it worked. The English only movement said, oh, okay, and they left us alone, so. Okay, there's two-way and one-way is simply difference in demographics. Let's go to the next slide. And two-way means two language groups being schooled through their two languages, such as maybe they're Arabic speakers and English speakers.
French speakers and English speakers in Quebec.
Yeah.
Or Louisiana.
And so, okay, let's use French English as our example. In Louisiana, that means that the two groups, the French speakers and the English speakers, are going to work together using the school curriculum through their two languages. Okay, one way means one language group being schooled through their two languages. And so this is just the demo.
And you're familiar with that. European nations have done that for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in addition to two-way, one-way, there's also the how much time is going to be spent in the non-dominant language. Then in the USA, it's the non-English language. And this model came from Canada. and it is the most effective of all, and it's called the 90-10 model. That is, the green would be the amount of time in the partner language. So for example, I'm going to use Korean as my example.
Okay.
There are lots of Korean programs in the West Coast and also some parts of the East Coast. Korean would be the language of instruction for 90% of the time in preschool and kindergarten, and very little English, 10%.
That's difficult to explain to the English-speaking parents. Okay, there are good reasons for it, and it does work, but it's not easy to explain how this works.
And in kindergarten, reading and writing would be introduced in Korean, but not in English, only in Korean. And then first grade English literacy gets introduced, and then they add more time in Korean, so that by fourth grade of primary school, the kids are 50% of the time in English, 50% of the time in the other language.
As we mentioned, we have 35 years worth of research and 8 million student records that say this is the most powerful form of dual language instruction in the long term.
Okay, now this is a political thing, and I'm not going to have enough time to explain it, but we'll just throw it up quickly. Canadian immersion got developed and is a powerful program, and it's a 90-10 program. US English only movement took the term immersion and said, oh, look, those kids are doing really well in Canada, so we'll do that in the United States and call it structured English immersion. And it's not a bilingual program, it's totally in English. And so they really slowed down our schools for a while until that's now not a popular program finally. Okay. The 50-50 model would be instruction in half of the time in each language, and all the way through school. And some of these programs separate the languages and do half of the time is in the non-English language and half the time in English. But then other programs put the two languages together and have the kids be working together, called translanguaging. And that's very appropriate when you have mostly bilinguals from birth. So,
As you may have, yes.
okay. Next slide. We're not going to have enough time to explain this.
We're going to have to pick it up.
Yeah, this is just showing you that two-way 90-10 works the very best of all. The kids who are English learners have closed the gap completely in English by grade 5. So, okay.
So once again, 50-50 is easy to explain, but 90-10 is more effective. Not by a huge amount, but by a noticeable and significant amount.
But all these programs work really well.
Yes, they're all much better than the alternatives, especially for English learners.
Okay.
Okay.
What's teaching like? Some classes are team taught. That's the most common in the USA because we don't have enough bilinguals yet. We need a lot more bilingual teachers, and that's our biggest issue in the United States right now. That would be where two teachers are taking two classes and they're exchanging the classes back and forth. One teacher is teaching in English, the other teacher is teaching in the partner language.
So we have two teachers, two classes. The student-teacher ratio remains the same, but each teacher gets to teach in his/her best language. Therefore, can teach at a higher level of cognitive demand. This is especially true and important in the secondary years.
And then some classes in some of our bilingual sections, and especially in the Southwest, are using one bilingual teacher who's very proficient in both languages. Okay. Teaching strategies include scaffolding. Let's switch to the next slide just to show that's what scaffolding means. That we use lots of extra clues to meaning through pictures and drawings and songs and all kinds of extra stuff where we're helping the kids. Oh, I get it. I get what the teacher is saying. Okay. And back to the, and then in addition, cooperative learning is a must, sometimes called collaborative learning in Europe. Cross-cultural thematic lessons, problem solving, very varied activities, active participation of all students. Remember, the students are teaching each other the other language all the time. So that's a very important feature in dual language classes. Not quiet classes, very active.
So to point out the obvious, these are not remedial strategies. These are enrichment strategies. We're moving away from low-level instruction, short-term objectives to a wide range of cognitive demand, a wide range of instructional objectives, and a lot more interesting instruction, which the students can become more participant in.
And we're going to skip to number 35 now. Okay. So we'll maybe in the question and answer time, we can talk more about teaching strategies if you'd like to. Okay. Research results. This is our infamous graph. We are very famous for this one. Every time we check on the web, there's probably about over 2 million examples of this, sometimes not drawn very well. But anyway, this is all English learners and following them from kindergarten through the 12th grade, all the way through school. Up to university level. And
this gives me an opportunity to introduce one of our themes, which is we look at the long-term achievement and proficiency of students, not the short-term. And this graph easily shows you why. Because in the short term, I'm going to switch to a different version, cover up the later years. In the first several years, through the first 4 years of instruction, there's not much difference in achievement as measured by state, in our case, state tests. There's not much difference among the various groups in mastery of the curriculum.
And this is when the kids are being tested in English and they're not yet proficient in English when they start school.
And so you might be very tempted to say at grade 4, well, this dual language stuff isn't working. Well, when you follow the same students 4 more years, the top 2 lines are the dual language lines, and they are greatly outscoring 4 years later the students who are not in dual language. What's going on here? I can hear you all saying, what happened? What happened is after grade 4, the cognitive demand of instruction greatly increased.
And the tests.
And the cognitive demand of the test items greatly increased. The dual language students had received extra cognitive stimulation all during their elementary years, and now the tests, they can show that cognitive stimulation because the tests are now measuring things at a higher cognitive level. And that's why the great separation here between dual language students who have been cognitively enhanced versus non-dual language students who mostly received remedial instruction, low-level instruction. This is where it really shows up. When the cognitive demand of instruction becomes more difficult, when the tests are more difficult, the students score completely differently at grade 8 than they did back in grade 4. And this is why you absolutely must look at the long term, not the short term, because you'll get the wrong answer when you only look at the first several years of a program's development.
Take off that last panel. You'll see when you see 61st normal curve equivalent, that's actually the 70th percentile. It's really high achievement, way above grade level. So your dual language graduates are going to get to a very high level of achievement.
So if anyone there is interested in research stuff, the annual effect size is about 0.3 standard deviations a year, and over a complete career in schooling, that really adds up to major differences between the top 2 lines, dual language lines, and the bottom 4 lines for English learners. There are colossal differences here in the end, but they don't show in the first several years because the tests are not yet sampling material of greater cognitive demand, that they will starting in the years after grade 4.
Okay, now remember those top 2 lines, and in the next figure, we show you those same top 2 lines here, and one of our school district sites had data, a huge data set, and they were able to give us data on roughly 2,000 students whose parents said, I don't want bilingual schooling for my child. I just want my child to be in the regular curriculum. And they were on grade level in 2nd grade. That's the 50th percentile is grade level achievement. A red line shows you that by 4th grade, the dual language students are doing better than the kids who were immersed sink or swim into only English. And their scores went down so far that by middle school years, they were mostly dropping out of school. And by 11th grade, we had 3 children left still in school. That line is a dropout line. So that's English only, sink or swim, no support bilingually. That's the difference.
And you don't find this out until you follow these students in the long term. This, as far as I know, is the first opportunity researchers have had to look at this many students over that amount of time. All right.
Now we're going to really have to speed through this to get to some of the things we want to make sure you get to see. This is from Houston, Texas School District, scores on the Spanish test. And the 50th percentile is grade level achievement. And you can see that all of the students, this is native English speakers, African-American students in the inner city, and native Spanish speakers are way above grade level in Spanish by grade 5. And that's what you want to see. You want to see them above grade level in the partner language.
Houston has 210,000 students, probably not too far off the number of students you have in your country's school system. So this is a big school system. And so I think you can look at the results and generalize appropriately.
Yeah. Okay. So then in English, the Stanford 9, they had gotten to way above grade level in English in the 2-way dual language classes. The green is African-American students in the inner city, way above grade level in English on a very difficult test. And the yellow is the Spanish speakers in the 2-way program, again, way above grade level in English. And these others are 1-way programs that got there by 7th grade. So
the bottom line is dual language is greatly superior to the alternatives in every time, every place, and in every way we've ever looked at it.
Quickly, we'll run through a few more figures here. This is from El Paso, Texas. And the green is the dual language students and the blue is the students not in dual language.
Here we're looking at degree of mastery of the curriculum.
Okay. And this is English learners here.
Much higher for dual language.
This is mostly Latino students who are fluent in English.
Significantly higher for dual language.
And this is native English speakers. There weren't very many of those in that district.
No, there weren't.
Okay, and this is on the border with Canada. This is a French English program, and you can see the blue is dual language, way outscoring the kids in the district who are not in dual language. And that's way above grade level. North Carolina, we have, we've analyzed all the state's data for 5 years.
That's 1.1 million students per year for 5 years.
You can see the languages that they have in their programs, Cherokee being one of them. That's an Indian language, indigenous language. But most of the dual language schools in that state are Spanish English. They have at least one dual language school in every school district. Yeah. And there's a pajama party for the kids where they're reading to their moms and dads in the partner language. Okay, we're going to really rush through this. This is all the North Carolina data. It's a huge, huge data sets, over 1 million student records each year. But you look at the red lines. The red lines are the dual language kids.
And the other two are 2 different groups of non-dual language. In every case, there's a very significant difference in favor of dual language, between dual language and non-dual language.
And you will see this is English learners who are not yet proficient in English. This is their testing in English. Reading is one. This is African-American students. This was one that North Carolina just said, oh, whoa, this is an incredible achievement level. This is a very high achievement on the state test.
These are at-risk native English speakers.
And these are mostly of low income. And next slide, we don't have enough time to go through this, but you can see that it's such a gifted program for the African-American students. This is Black students who had not been well served by their schools in the past, and now they're doing great in dual language classes. And the main thing that the teachers and principals said, look at that bottom point there, is that it's the teaching that makes the difference, where when we're doing second language teaching strategies with all the students all the time, the kids who didn't used to do very well in school say, oh, I get it. I know what the teacher wants me to do. And then they can do it. And they get excited about school.
So native speakers of the language, English in our country and Slovene in yours, do better than native speakers who receive normal traditional instruction. They do better in dual language than they would if they were in a regular classroom.
This is white students, ethnically of European descent, and low-income students. And this is students who are in special education. They also benefit greatly from dual language classes. You have had Fred Genesee speak to you in the past, yes. And he is a big advocate of saying if a child has a special need, it still is possible that they should be considered for the dual language program, and that they can do very well in dual language.
Yes, we know Fred. I'm sure he was glad to see these results confirming what he's been saying for 20 years or more.
Right.
Okay.
All right. This is the foundation, research foundation that we developed. Go ahead to the next one. For understanding what's going on here. For native English speakers in the USA, they get all the support for language acquisition for school. They get academic, cognitive, and language development in English, and a sociocultural process that's very warm and supportive for them. So they're going to be additive bilinguals if they add another language to their schooling.
So another way of saying this is that typical American schools were basically designed for native English speakers and emphasize everything that they need.
Yeah.
But what about those who are not?
For the English learners,
yes, right.
If they are getting English only instruction, then many parts of that are not being emphasized and not developed enough. And they're mainly working on language development, but only in English, not in their native language. And it ends up with cognitive issues that are severe for the English learners. So English only is not a good idea.
You can see the difference. Native English speakers get all these things fully addressed, and students who are English learners who are instructed only in English don't get all of those. In fact, they only get one of them, and only partially. So it's not a great surprise, is it, from a theoretical point of view, that English only instruction doesn't work nearly as well as dual language instruction. You would expect that from the theory.
So we explain it to the upper administration this way. Children have developmental needs that must be met in instruction. All these things are things that adults are already mature in. And so when they're thinking about, oh, well, they ought to just learn English, they're not catching on to the fact that they're thinking about themselves as adults. Children have different needs. And when you develop more than one language in school, the children do much, much better. Home language and the other language.
What happens here is that adults in supervisory positions use adult decision criteria to apply to students. They're completely different instructional cases. So your administrators and your policymakers really need to understand this. If I come to Slovenia and want to learn your language, I have all these things covered already. I'm a cognitively mature adult. All I need is instruction in your language. That's not true of children. They need all of these things in addition to instruction in your language.
That's done through the curriculum. So our bilingual learners do best when they get schooling through the two languages all the way across the curriculum, all the way through all the grades, where they're getting academic development, language, and cognitive development in both languages. And you can do more than two languages. You can do a trilingual program, a multilingual, a plurilingual program. But the social and cultural process that's going on through both of the languages really enhances the students' confidence and motivation to do well in school. Also prepares them for the workplace of the 21st century, which is very collaborative. Okay. There are cognitive advantages to being bilingual.
Notice
or multilingual.
Notice that the word proficient bilinguals is underlined. In other words, you folks are no doubt proficient bilinguals, and therefore you enjoy all of these advantages. I've already admitted that I'm not a proficient bilingual. I've studied other languages, but I'm not really proficient. So you folks are the great beneficiaries of these. The first 5 have been known for 20 years or more. The ones starting with executive function are newer, research especially done in Canada and Toronto, and have been added to this list in the last 10 years or so. So these are all reasons to produce in your instructional programs proficient bilinguals, not just sort of bilinguals or quasi-bilinguals like me. All right, now we're going to skip secondary. You're going to stop.
We'll just do a teeny bit on secondary. This is looking at the programs that start in the USA in 6th grade, which in some countries is classified as primary still, but anyway, 6th grade through 12th grade. That let's go to 64. And what we are seeing now as these programs are developing in the USA is that the best programs are the ones where they invite lots of students to be in the classes in the partner language.
Including recent immigrants, right?
Yeah, so recent immigrants, it's very important that they be in their language of instruction. We're getting a lot of kids from, for example, Central America and Mexico, who have missed school a great deal. And so they're having to catch up to grade level achievement. That's the category called interrupted formal schooling. And when they get to join the dual language classes, they catch up to grade level in their native language while they're developing English. And it works really well for those students. Heritage speakers of the partner language belong in there too, and native English speakers who are fluent enough in the language to be able to enroll. Okay, and let's jump to 67. I'll just show you a few examples of things to think about. I'm jumping to high school level. High school dual language program lead to very high graduation rates, and so for English learners who are in those programs, where we were graduating half of them before, now we're graduating almost all of them. The programs are learning that they have to offer courses that are very challenging because the dual language kids who have been in schooling in 2 languages or more all the way through are so far advanced. They're 2 grades ahead of their peers not in dual language. And so they want courses that they're going to get credit for university work while they're still in high school.
Right.
And this is happening across the United States.
That requires a modification and changes in the practice of typical secondary schools.
Yeah, and they're high achievers. They're incredible. Okay.
What's next?
Next one. Dual language high schools offer contexts for children to understand how they're going to use their multilingualism, their bilingualism in the workplace. And so they develop leadership skills and collaborative skills, and they can get the biliteracy seal, and they're ready for life. So it's really a huge benefit besides just the cognitive development and all the things that come with schooling through multiple languages. Okay. Let's jump to number 76. We're almost done. So we can let you all ask some questions. So why does dual language work so well? Okay.
Well, I mentioned earlier that dual language programs well implemented are the most powerful thing you can do for not only native speakers of a language, but also for students who are learning that language in your schools. And so the question arises, why is that? Why are the effect sizes, the statistical measures of programmatic impact for dual language so much higher, so much greater than the effect sizes for other programs that both native speakers and English learners could be placed in? And this is my attempt to turn a bunch of the analysis done here, for those of you who are statistics freaks, is called path analysis, PATH. And I've tried to take the numbers, a lot of numbers that you might not be very interested in, and turn them into pictorial representation of what we found. Notice in the middle, the green arrows mention the number one and number two major impacts of dual language instruction. Increased cognitive stimulation from the use of two languages is first and foremost. Secondly, increased student engagement with the good instruction that we believe is probably going on in your schools. Students get more of it and they are more enthusiastic, they're less bored, those kinds of factors. And those two factors alone are sufficient to produce significant short-term increases in achievement. But there's more, because those, follow the black arrows now, those two major impacts of dual language instruction feed back and cause improved student motivation. For example, what does that do? It increases student engagement. The feedback on the left side, it causes higher student self-esteem and confidence when they experience the two main effects, the green lines. And what does that do? It increases the effect of the main green lines, the two main effects of dual language instruction. So what's happening is the two primary outcomes of dual language instruction also cause secondary outcomes. Those of you who are, like I used to be, a teacher of physics will recognize this as a positive feedback loop. Okay, and I even go further and say, this is an achievement amplifier. It amplifies the initial effects of increased cognitive stimulation and increased student engagement and makes them even greater over time. Not in the short term, it takes a while for this to happen, but in the longer term, over a period of 5, 6, 7 or more years, there is an amplification of these two major effects, and thus the long-term effects are, as I said, the largest I have ever seen in more than 40 years of being a professional evaluator for any program I've ever evaluated. This program, dual language instruction, when well implemented, is the most powerful thing you can do, both for students who are learning your national language and for those who already speak it.
Number 80. And so we encourage you to remember all of this from our presentation. Dual language is the standard curriculum. It's the mainstream. It's not just for English learners. It's for students from diverse heritage who are not English learners, and includes students in poverty, students with special needs. All of those groups do better in dual language than not in dual language.
And so Ginger and I have devoted, or we have decided, and we've already devoted a number of years to this, but the rest of our careers, as long as it may be, will be devoted to helping the United States of America move in the direction of making this the default education for every student. Okay, we have 3,000 programs and 16,000 school districts. There's a long ways to go. It's already underway. It's gathering momentum, and we'd like to push it based on our 35 years of research as much as we can. So we offer it to you for your possible inclusion in your education system as well.
It also makes teaching better. And so I like to tell dual language teachers, you guys are awesome. You are the best. You're much better as a teacher than a monolingual teacher.
What we found is that the good teaching that Ginger is talking about that is routinely done by teachers of English learners is also very effective in good teaching for students who are native speakers of the language. It works for, especially if they're in an at-risk category. So this is not just something for English learners. Yes, it's very powerful for them, but it's also powerful for students who are not English learners, or in your case, Slovene learners. Okay, so it's a across the board improvement and reform of the education system. We have a long ways to go in our country, and so you folks will have to decide whether this is something you want to be involved in as well.
We have 5 books that are available from Dual Language Education of New Mexico, and also on Amazon. You can get them through Amazon. Of the 5 books, the one we would recommend the most would be the yellow book, Why Dual Language Schooling. That's kind of a summary of all the things we've been talking about. And our website is thomasandcollier.com.
You can find there everything we've ever done in the way of research or articles written for free, other than the books. The publishers won't let us give those away for free, so we have to work through them. But everything else we've ever done, including research studies we've done for the federal government, for state governments, for local school systems, we're all there under publications and resources at thomasandcollier.com. Our publisher, our primary publisher, is Fuente Press of Dual Language Education of New Mexico. And so we can, in the middle of the page there, emphasize their website, DLENM, Dual Language Education of New Mexico.org, has a lot of resources, especially for teachers. They position themselves as an organization for and by teachers. And so that's, you might find some considerable value there. When you, if you buy the books, you can also have access to, if you can't find a slide on our website, you can get it from our publisher in ready-to-use form for your own PowerPoints or your own instructional uses. So every slide we've ever published in a book is there and is accessible to you.
Okay, we want to open it up for questions.
Thank you very much for this, well, very informative talk, and I'm so happy, I mean, that there is finally enough research that shows that bilingual education, I mean, I can call it now bilingual anyway, they're not, you know, or maybe later, I mean, even if the decision makers listen to this, and they should listen to this, so that dual language education and or bilingual education really works. So thank you for all the work that you have done, I mean, for the future generation, and hopefully the decision makers will invest money in something that really helps learners to succeed in life. Thank you very much. So
say that in the research community, the results are unassailable. No one in the research community really argues with this. It's only the politicians and other folks who are still sometimes not always convinced.
Yeah,
the research community understands it completely.
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, this sounds very familiar, you know, in our case. So I've been also, I mean, let's say fighting for, so that we have lowered the starting age, you know, of learners, so that now they start when they are 6. So to learn English or German, 90% of English, but I mean, 10 years ago, it was, you know, it was something that was unimaginable, you know, for the decision makers. But now I think that things are changing. So please, I would like to invite the participants now, so the audience, to ask questions. Or I might, I don't know, come up with one question and then as an icebreaker, and then ask others to join in. You know, you were talking about so different language combinations, right? So English and then some other language. So this, I mean, let's say dual language programs. And you also mentioned language Cherokee. Is it Cherokee?
Oh, Cherokee.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Cherokee, yeah, which is an Indian language, right? I mean, is this language also, I mean, does it have a written script, or is it,
yes.
It does, okay. Because I was wondering what would happen if, you know, you have a language which only has a spoken form and no written form.
That's a good question. There are roughly 20 different indigenous languages that are supported in dual language programs now across the USA. And some of them are written and some are not. Cherokee and Navajo are both written languages.
Is Keres?
I don't think so.
We work a lot with the Pueblo groups, Indian groups in New Mexico. There are, I think, 18 or 19 tribes, Pueblos, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
And many of them don't, their language is not really written yet.
As an example of refugees, the Hmong from Southeast Asia, when they came and they had never been to school before, the people decided to develop curricular materials in Hmong. So it's not a written language in Southeast Asia, but it is in the United States. because they've developed at least primary grades curricular materials that tell the stories of their people and things like that. Another group where they did the same thing was Haitian Creole. We have quite a few students from Haiti, the island in the Caribbean, who have come to New York City and Florida. And they have developed, the bilingual educators in those two places have developed a lot of Haitian Creole materials for K through 12. So anything can happen.
Anything is possible, right? If there is enough motivation, yeah. Okay, anybody would like to ask a question? Not yet. So my other question was, I mean, how does the school decide, let's say, first of all, for the dual language program, and secondly, how do they decide which language they choose? I mean, next to English.
Okay, definitely by the number of English learners who are speakers of that partner language. So that would be the first choice, would be if they want to serve the English learners, if the usually the larger number is Spanish speaking in the USA.
About 75%, right?
Yeah, 75%. And so they would start with that. But then, for example, we're working in a school district now in Oregon, Beaverton, Oregon, that has a good Spanish-English dual language program developed from pre-K to 12th grade. And it's been working quite well for a while. They're now doing research to look at how the students are doing longitudinally. And they're planning to add Arabic and Japanese next year. So that's because those are the next two largest language groups in their school district. So they're going by the numbers of students of that language background.
Now, we would point out what everyone understands, I'm sure, in that in a large school system like Houston, Texas, with 210,000 students, there are probably upwards of 150 languages spoken by at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 students. And so the question is, where do you draw the line? Where do you decide, well, we can, 75% of our students are Spanish speakers, we can definitely design programs for them. But if we only have 10 Urdu speakers or 12 Hmong speakers, what are we expected to do for them? And so for years, the federal government has suggested that there be a minimum number, 20 to 30 or so speakers of the language
per grade level
before you are asked or even expected to set up a program in English and that language. So you can't do it if there are only a handful of speakers in the entire school system. Now, but if there are enough to make a classroom, then you could do it if you wanted to. And if you can find the appropriate and qualified teacher to do that, that's another great issue, of course.
Yeah. So how, exactly. How many teachers then, I mean, do you, let's say, need? Is this half?
Okay. We'll talk about that in a minute. I wanted to add one more point. Okay. Say you have a Spanish-English program and an Urdu speaking family says, we want our child to be in the Spanish-English program. It's okay. We have found that those students do very, very well. They're developing trilingualism. And the parents are saying, well, I want my child to be fluent in Spanish because that's the second world language. It's one of the top world languages.
It's ahead of English in terms of English native speakers
worldwide. There are more native speakers of Spanish than there are native speakers of English. And so that parent, what you have to advise the parent is you must teach your child literacy in Urdu at home. You know, so they are going to still develop literacy in their native language, but it's going to be done by the parents. And then we will teach your child in Spanish and English at school. And we've analyzed data on roughly about 10% of the kids in each school district choose that who are in the dual language program, and they do just fine developing trilingualism.
I can imagine, because I mean they're already bilingual, I think, when they enter school, more or less, right?
In fact, they score very high.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
So the teaching question, how many teachers is that?
I mean, yeah, for example, if you have an English-Spanish program, right? I mean, do you then employ, I don't know, half of the teachers that are, I mean, that they teach through Spanish and half that teach through English, or how does this work?
So first you have to decide how many classes are we going to have, because some of the classes will be English only. Still, they rarely are able to develop a bilingual school at the beginning. So they might start with half of the school is bilingual schooling and the other half is not. And then while they're doing that, they would make sure that they have enough bilingual teachers in the community, or that they can get those teachers from the countries that they want to hire from. So for example, in North Carolina, when they started their bilingual programs, they had very few bilingual teachers and they had to hire from other countries. So they have a whole system set up for the teacher can come for 5 years to the United States and be a bilingual teacher in the United States, and then they have to go back to their home country. So a lot of the schools are doing that as the beginning stages. But then as the students go through high school and go to university, some of them want to be teachers. And so they come back. And so you're growing your future bilingual staff that way.
One of the additional factors that comes into play is if you're going to have an integrated program where every teacher is proficient in 2 languages, or whether you're going to take the team teaching approach that we mentioned in the presentation, where you pair us together. She teaches in Spanish, I teach in English, and we switch classes. You have 2 classes, 2 teachers, but each teacher teaches in the language they basically know best. And so that means you only need one person who is a true bilingual. And remember, I don't count as a true bilingual, as a proficient bilingual, but I can teach in my first language. So that means you only need half of your teachers to be fully proficient bilinguals. That's what North Carolina is doing a lot. And for the reasons Ginger mentioned, they don't have very many bilingual teachers. They have to go outside the country to get the ones they have, and therefore they want to use their native English-speaking teachers to the greatest degree possible by pairing them with a proficiently bilingual teacher. And so that allows you to get away with half of the teachers you would otherwise require. As a former administrator, I appreciate that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, we can, we do have
teachers don't want to leave the school district; they want to stay, so that their job is still secure.
Yeah. They can be threatened until they understand this. They could find the coming of the advent of dual language to be threatening, because I'm going to lose my job. No, you're not. But you're an important part of a dual language program in a team teaching scenario.
We do have these experiences. We have 2 minorities in Slovenia. There are 2 minorities. One is Hungarian, the other one is Italian. And I mean, there are, I don't know, 5, 6 schools, but they do exactly that. So half of the lesson is taught in Hungarian, the other half is taught Slovenian, and they are all, when they finish, they are, as you said, proficient bilinguals in Hungarian and Slovenian, and they have no problems learning other languages, German, English.
Once you've acquired your second language, the third and fourth are
as we know this from research. Yes, you're right. Okay, so ladies, or many, I don't know if there's a man, please come up with questions. I've been just looking. Please, don't be afraid.
Sure,
don't be shy. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Yeah, that was really interesting. So when do the children start? I mean, you said that if they start in, so with this, 90-10%, right? Program, then they start when they're 3, or how old are they?
Most of the school districts start in kindergarten, but some also started in preschool. So when they're 3 years old, 4 years old, and then going on to all the way through.
Now we should point out that when they start a program, they started in kindergarten and then wait till the next year to move to first grade. So it can take 10 to 12 years to run through all of the grades of schooling. They don't just start K through 12 all at once, because that would be practical. That
Yes.
buys time to
Yeah.
hire and find more bilingual
Yeah,
teachers. If you
yeah.
start in kindergarten, it gives you a year to find the first grade teachers,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
another year to find the second grade teachers, and so on. So this is a long-term reform. It's not something that happens in a year or two.
No, no. You need time, yes. And I mean, I'm happy or somehow really grateful that you showed this, you know, the curve, you know, when it shows when they outperform, right, the others, and this is a long term, right,
Right. In
goal.
the early years, and this is a real problem, again, from an administrative point of
Yeah,
view, most
exactly.
administrators, most school boards, most
yeah.
policymakers are much too impatient to wait
Yes,
3, 4, or 5 years to see results. They want
Yeah.
to see results
Exactly.
sooner than that.
exactly.
And that's why it's important that they understand this is a long-term
Yes.
innovation, a long-term reform, and the results don't show up on test scores, which are largely very inadequate measures.
Yes.
They don't show up on test scores until the beginning of middle school. That's after grades 4 or 5, something like that. That's when the cognitive demand of instruction increases. That's when the advantages of dual language instruction really start to show themselves.
And this is in the second language, but in their home language,
Oh, yes.
they should be on grade level right at the beginning.
Right.
So this is only for their how long does it take to get to high proficient level in second language on a test that's testing mathematics and science and social studies, not just the language, but school stuff, all of the school curriculum. And so that's a very difficult test. And we like to say it's not that it takes 6 years to become proficient in a language.
No.
It's that it takes 6 years to get to grade level in your second language.
A much more difficult task.
Yeah.
There is one question, from my colleague. She says, what about the curriculum? So is the same content, you know, taught in both languages, or is the content different? So,
Okay, good question.
That's a very good question.
Yeah. If the students would become bored if they did the same thing in each
twice.
language. So what teachers do is they'll reinforce. It's sort of a spiraling curriculum where you're visiting some of the words, the vocabulary. You're developing the vocabulary in both languages. But you wouldn't do the identical lesson. You would do something different that's taking the students to the next level of development of that lesson.
And thus it does require coordination between the two
Yes,
teachers.
Yeah.
A lot of it too.
Yeah.
And that's why most probably teaching is better, isn't it? I mean, because you know, when people cooperate,
A lot more planning.
more planning, better. I mean, better, maybe more suitable teaching strategies develop.
Yes. The two teachers help each other because one might come up with an idea and, hey, we could do this, and then the others, you know, and you're helping each other. Two heads are always better than one.
That's right, and then just one. Yeah.
In traditional instruction, many teachers, at least in our country, have in the past taught in isolated fashion. They go in, close the classroom door, and do what they think is appropriate. This requires a lot more between teacher cooperation and collaboration than what we have experienced in the past. And that's one of the major reforms of a school district that we're hoping to encourage indirectly through bringing dual language instruction, which requires more collaboration. It also requires more collaboration among levels of administrators too. The elementary schools need to talk with the schools that come after elementary school to make sure that they're all on the same, have the same goals and are encouraging the same long-term outcomes. So much more communication between and among educators and between and among students occurs in a dual language environment.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you're not just going away, I mean, in my opinion, from monolingualism, but you're also going away from teachers being isolated creatures, right?
Right.
You know, we are believed to be, you know, isolated creatures, but yeah, it's not good.
This is one of the reasons why we routinely work with school districts who say they are interested in working with us for as many as 3, 4, 5 years to give them time to bring in these new changes, these reforms to how they operate the school district, it takes time to
Yes.
make these changes happen. And once they happen, then we say, okay, now you fully implemented a dual language program the way it should be. Now it can be a good time to evaluate it. But there's no reason to evaluate a program that is still developing and is still immature in its development.
May I just ask a few questions about, let's say, upper secondary level?
Yes.
When, you know, when you have subjects like, I don't know, chemistry, or you are physics teacher, right? I mean, really specialized subjects. So then you really need to hire, okay, so teachers who are fluent, I mean, proficient in the language, plus a subject specialist. Right?
Exactly. Yes. And that's the biggest challenge of all, to find the bilingual teachers who are qualified and certified to teach that subject. That's not easy.
I can imagine.
But it's powerful. And the dual language students don't have to, like, if they're taking calculus in the partner language, you don't have to have them retake that course in English. They already know the material, and they a lot of the school districts will get, the teachers will get anxious about, they took the course in we'll say, let's try another language. In Chinese, they took the course in Chinese, and they're going to be tested in English at the end of the year. Oh no, we can't, they're not going to do well. And they do just fine. The students still score higher, even though they've gotten all the material in the non-English language.
In fact, they frequently score higher because they understood more of the material in their first language, and they were able to apply it at a higher level, and thus their score on the end of year test is higher than the native speakers of the language. We've seen that any number of times.
This reminds me also of, you know, well, I would say this teaching approach, which is called, I don't know if you have heard of it, CLIL, which is Content and Language Integrated Learning, or maybe in America, I think you call it content-based language learning, right?
Yes, yes.
And actually, when, I mean, a lot of research has been done on this approach, and what students say, they say that it's not easy, but I have to think harder. You know, and in this way, I also kind of focus more, and I try to understand. So I understand it better at the end. So, you know, there are many. I mean, these are the responses by the students, which is
another way of saying, number one, cognitive development. Number two, greater engagement with instruction.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
those are the two things.
Yeah, and cognitive development. Yeah.
And that's really what we're doing in dual language classes, is we're doing content and language teaching all the time. Every single class is a combination of those two.
Which is authentic, isn't it? I mean, this is what students want to learn. They don't want to learn about the language, but they want to learn the content and I mean, something new. Yeah, so that's interesting.
I think it's fair to say that we already know that this works, but you have to do it correctly and validly and with fidelity. You can't just walk in and say, today we're going to do dual language instruction with no preparation. It requires a lot of work, organization, but the rewards are amazing when you are able to carry it off well. It might take several years to develop your programs, and routinely with the districts we work with, it takes 3 to 5 years to develop their programs to the point where they say, now we're doing real dual language and not some pale substitute.
What about if, because we have, I mean, in Europe, there are such programs where they would only teach, I don't know, 1, 2, or maybe 3 subjects, you know, through another language. So it won't be, you know, like what you showed, you know, 90, 10, and then up to 50, 50, let's say, %, but they would do, I don't know, 2 or 3 subjects through another.
2 or 3 subjects would still be considered a 50-50 program, as long as the students get those subjects in the other language sometime in the next year. In other words, over a 2-year period, that they get the opportunity to study that subject in the other language.
Yeah, this is what I think you're quite right. There was, a study that reported, I think, from Germany. When if you teach, one subject consistently through another language, then children don't develop the terms in the other language. So I think it's important, to have it in both at some point. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Absolutely. So what can you say if we develop, let's say if we develop dual language program in one of the schools here in Slovenia, so with, Slovenian and English, do you think that Slovenian will still be strong among the children? I'm, being a little bit.
Yeah, we do, because you'll be developing additive bilinguals who are, they will, their home language will still be supported by the school curriculum, and they'll be thinking about the ways in which they're going to use each of those languages in their professional lives. Additive bilinguals don't lose their first language.
Exactly. Yeah, I discuss this additive and subtractive bilingualism with our students. Yeah, they find this quite interesting. I think that the teachers, the audience, now we are all kind of already, convinced that this works. But how to persuade the decision makers? How to persuade the authorities? Any suggestions? Any recommendation?
Well, you could look at, for example, our country. There has been a much higher rate of adoption of dual language in the last 10 years because, one, parents have come to understand the advantages of being truly proficiently bilingual for their children. And two, administrators have had now 10 years or 20 years worth of opportunity to look at our research and others' test scores. And they're saying, oh my, you raised the high school graduation rate from 50% to 95%. I want to know more about that. Or you raised test scores in North Carolina for African-American students who are low socioeconomic status from the 30th percentile to the 55th percentile. We definitely want to know more about that. We've been trying to bring about that kind of change for 40 years with very little success with remedial programs. They've spent, in their country, we spend billions of dollars a year on remedial programs that I'll be the first one to tell you are ineffective.
Yes. Okay,
so after a while, people look at the data, eventually, someone shoves it in their face, if nothing else, and they say, oh, I see. In California, they rejected bilingual education until their test scores fell down to number 50 out of the 50 states.
At the bottom.
At the very bottom. And then they went,
United States
and the legislature says, what's going on? And well, we're ignoring the needs of 25% of our students. That's going to bring your test scores down. So we need to do something, and they did. And now, 5 years later, they're back up to number 35 compared to the other states. So sooner or later, policymakers, if they have any real world inclination at all, will be convinced to look at results that are clear and definitive. And ours are clear and definitive. Yeah. After 35 years, we and other people have easily and clearly shown that, done correctly, this form of instruction is the most powerful thing you can do for learners of a second language as well as the speakers of the primary language. So sooner or later, not every politician and not every administrator, not every policymaker ignores reality. Sometimes they do, but we hope in the long term they can be persuaded to see what is, so sometimes they'll say things like, well, that's only one study and it's done over here. And no, we're talking about 35 years worth of research in 18 US states and 8 million student records. It's completely definitive.
Yes.
Okay, there's no way to argue with this. It's clear. And not only we have found this, but 6 other major follow-up studies have also found exactly the same things. So it's really clear, even to American policymakers, which is
I can imagine. Yeah. And also, when you think about teaching languages, isn't it that the success of the proficiency, you know, in the other language is also much higher. If you teach it, you know, through other subjects, then if you just, I don't know, I mean, I don't know if you have such students, but if you learn the language as a language, you know, without any, how to say, content-based, say goal, then sometimes it happens that students, I don't know, have been learning a language for years, but they're still not proficient, or they still can't use it in real life.
Yeah.
Does this happen in the United States?
Yeah, oh, definitely it does. And this is another interesting thing that's happened with the politics of the movement. For a long time, the bilingual educators were separate from the world language educators. They used to be called foreign language, now they're called world language educators. They wouldn't even talk to each other.
Heck, they didn't even live on the same planet. You know, they lived in different universes. They were completely untouchable.
Sounds familiar.
The bilingual students began to do better than the world language students. Then they began to look at it, and now they're talking to each other for the first time.
And actually collaborating.
And starting to collaborate. And the world language teachers are saying, oh, you can get your students to such a higher proficiency level. Let's talk.
This program isn't just for English learners, it's for the native speakers as well. And they do better in this program than they do in our former world language classes. That's interesting. Yeah.
Because in Europe, we have had these problems that, I mean, in many countries, you know, students are, because let's say English is, you know, still the most widely spread foreign and second language, I mean, foreign language mostly. And, you know, you've been learning it for 10 years sometimes, and they can't use it. You know, they can't speak fluently, and they can't do anything through that language. So that's also something to think about. Yeah.
In the end, in our country, back to your question about policymakers, at some point people realize, for example, in California, 25% of their students are English learners. They cannot afford as a state to forget and to about 25% of their students. The social costs in the long term are off the scale enormous. Okay, it's not just the school cost now, it's when those people become adults and they don't have enough education, they can't perform well in the workplace. Those kinds of long-term societal costs, which economists call opportunity costs, are huge. And so once policymakers can be persuaded to look beyond this year's budget and look at what will be the consequences of our decisions 10 years from now, or even 20 years from now, then a lot of them will go, oh, okay, well, maybe we need to think about this. But as long as they're focused on the short term and getting from one year's annual budget to another, it's very difficult.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Maybe in the chat? Buddy, you can write in Slovene and I can translate, so that's not a problem. Or maybe we have answered, we have had such a fruitful discussion. So then I would like to thank you and would like to invite you maybe in the future for a longer interview that we can publish in our, you know, newspapers. Would help us to maybe move the language education into another direction. So thank you so much for being available and for sharing all this data with us. We will sure, I mean, we are going at the faculty for sure to order all the books, so and we'll read them with pleasure.
Thank you. We enjoyed it. And we hope that you will, if you have questions, things you didn't think of.
Yeah,
today,
we will.
we have our email addresses. You can contact us. We may take a while to get back to you because we get a lot of questions.
I know. We are patient. We will wait. But thank you for taking your time. And, you know, maybe in one day you can come to Slovenia and, you know, present the results. That would be wonderful.
Thank you.
So,
You're doing great.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you to all for listening and all the best to your home. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye and lots of health.